the value of the money that you've got, the value of the paper money in your pocket, it goes down day after day after day. And the reason for that is because fiat currency, that's what it's called, is created out of thin air by central banks and national state governments. It's easy for them to say, oh, we've got a problem, we've got a shortfall, we don't have enough money in the budget. Let's just go and print a few $1 billion or a few £1 billion and we will get through the next period of government. But the problem with that is the purchasing power of your paper money falls all the time. If you think what you could buy, in fact, I'll give you an example. I watched an English YouTuber a few days ago. He's another Yorkshireman, and he was talking about the price of a little piece of chocolate which we used to have as kids called a Freddo, and the typical price in the local shop going back 20 years was 5p. That same little bar of chocolate, tiny little frog-shaped bar of chocolate, is now a little small slab of chocolate with the face of a frog on it, but it's gone up to 35p. So a 700% difference in pricing from when it was that simple little 5p bar of chocolate that you could buy on the way to or on the way back from school, or maybe on the weekend with your pocket money. Inflation is what the government calls it, and that doesn't necessarily include all the items. When they give us an inflation figure, it might include certain costs of goods, certain costs of utilities, but it may not accurately reflect many of the things that make up the living expenses that you and I have every day. And one of the things that I was talking to some small business friends about last week, in fact, I've had 3 separate conversations about it since I got to Mexico, one by video and 2 of those calls with business owning friends here, is the failing value of the money that we rely on when we traditionally go through school and college. Maybe we go to university, maybe we start our first job at 16 or 18 or 22 or whatever it is. And we have this distant perspective thinking, okay, in the future, I'll be okay. I will have my pension and all will be good. I'm 62 years old, and the government in Britain announced last week, oh, I know that when you left school, we thought you'd be retiring at 60, then it was 62, then it was 65, now it's going to be 67. So I've got, in theory, another 5 years till I retire and redeem or start receiving my government-funded state pension. It's not that it's government-funded, it's that they have 2 issues. One is that less money is being paid into the pension pot now, and the other is that with an ageing population, hence the smaller contributions, the other is that the money hasn't been that well managed by prior governments. In Scandinavia, for example, if you take Norway, they have an incredible sovereign wealth fund because all the revenue and taxes that have been able to generate from oil exploration and extraction of oil over the last 40 years has been invested for the benefit of the citizenry. In England, that hasn't happened, and England as a country is pretty much bankrupt, quite apart from all the current political issues it has with too many people clinging to a small rock in the part of the country that is a difficult thing for everybody. And there's no opportunity for people to think that the government will defend them or that it will put them first as citizens. Our government has decided very clearly that the human rights of everybody in the world is far more important than our own citizens. But that's a segue, and it's a very disturbing segue, and I'll leave that up to other people where their dedication is to that particular battle. What I'm looking at as a person who's interested in you and I who have small ventures, small enterprises, whether it is you with 3 or 4 staff or me with several contracted individuals who are not on permanent payroll, but support me in everything that I do and that we do as a family. What I want to talk about is how you can protect for your current financial position, because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone in 5 or 10 years' time. And to talk about that in a way that I think is valid and meaningful. In the meaningful work, thinking about that word, there's a chapter in there, I think it's chapter 10. It's called Count Your Money. And you have seen me in a large variety of videos talking about using tracking systems. They can be spreadsheets on a laptop or on an iPad, of course they can. But they can also be simple little things in here where you track your income, your expenditure, and how you allocate your money so that you live on certainly less than 90% and you invest a minimum of 10% into things that will generate revenue for you. And what I want to talk about is Bitcoin. I want to talk about the place that digital currency has in your portfolio, because a lot of people, and this is why I had these 3 conversations this last few days, a lot of people have very little understanding of the function of Bitcoin or how it compares to other cryptocurrencies or digital tokens that people are using, thinking, okay, this will support my future, or some of them, many millions of people thinking, okay, I can buy this, trade it, make a profit, and then go back again and again. I'm not interested now. I used to work in the banking sector. Daily trading was something we watched and engaged in all the time. My focus was Latin America and the United States and Canada. And it was a constant churning almost of hundreds of millions in those days. Now that will be billions because of the declining power of money. But Bitcoin is a very special thing. When I was working in the college on this recent contract for the last year, I was the only one of my colleagues with an interest in Bitcoin or BTC, because all of them were thinking, oh, well, it's $65,000 a coin. I haven't got $65,000. And I had an ongoing conversation with them saying, look, what would be good for you to understand is that a Bitcoin is comprised of tiny little units of value called Satoshis. And there's actually 100 million Satoshis to a coin. When I first had a foray into buying Bitcoin, it was in 2008. And it was very easy to buy half a Bitcoin because they were so inexpensive. And you think, well, I'll get half a Bitcoin and hold on to it. And that made sense. Now, with a Bitcoin at, in today's reckoning, $112,025, that's a huge amount of money. But not if you think about it in terms of the tiny units, the Satoshis that you can buy and accumulate. So, for example, we were looking at an account on 2 days ago, where a couple of £1,000 buys 2.5 million Satoshis. Now, right now, those are 2.5 million tiny units of value. But what if the Bitcoin value increases 5-fold over the next 5 years? I happen to think it will be a lot greater than that. But if it increases 5-fold, then the purchasing power of those Satoshis, because everything in the world goes down in value when compared to Bitcoin, everything goes up in value when compared to dollars or pounds or paper fiat currency. So buying a quarter of a million Satoshis for the sake of a couple of £1,000 is a sharp thing to do, a smart action to take, because those will have a stronger purchasing power in, let's say, 4 or 5 years. None of this is financial advice. This is just me saying, look, it's made sense for our family to have stocks and shares, to have rental income, but it also has always made sense to have some form of digital protection of your funds that is outside the control of banks and central government. And also, and this was particularly important for us as people who travel regularly between different countries, but that doesn't matter. It could be you just want to be out of the mainstream system and be in a place where not everybody knows everything you do or everything you have. So just here's an example. If you were to put $10 away this week, not next week or next month, but this week, $10 on the current pricing of Bitcoin at $112.25 today, 112,226. $10 buys you a pip under 9,000 Satoshis, 8,911. If you put $100 away in the month of September, that's 89,105 Satoshis. In 5 years' time, what you can buy with those Satoshis will be far more than you can buy with the $100 that you put into it, because the $100, the value of that, if you had kept that in your building society or your bank account or saved under your bed, that's going down, as is all fiat currency. The reason that national governments are so scared at the moment is because they're seeing people divert savings into silver and gold and digital currency. And the strongest digital currency, look at the work of Strategy and Michael Saylor as simple examples. You just Google them and just watch a few dozen videos and educate yourself. The power of people's movement away from fiat currency into those three assets, silver, gold, and Bitcoin, that is terrifying national governments. So they want to be engaging with and starting to say, oh yeah, we think Bitcoin is a good thing. They haven't said that for a long time because they know that it takes money out of the mainstream system, where commercial banks use that money to lend other money and generate money out of thin air, much like central governments printing money to put into their economies. No, if you can start to think in terms of having an additional asset in your portfolio from everything you earn in your salary or your meaningful work, and it might be that your salary is your meaningful work, which is a great thing. Every 10,000 or 100,000 Satoshis, although it costs very little now, it has a great future strength, because unlike this paper money, which has no value at all next year or next month, compared to what it buys today, it will go into decline. Your Satoshis, because there are only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin mined in the whole world, that creates its own scarcity. It creates its own demand for access or greed to have some Satoshis. It may be the case that even though we are 15 years almost into the growth of Bitcoin, the vast majority of the world holds none at all. Almost everybody in your street, your community, your school, your college, your workplace, almost everybody thinks, oh yes, maybe I should, but they don't know how to get started. They don't know where to look to educate themselves. I would simply say, follow the sorts of dedicated YouTube channels which talk just about digital economies, digital wealth, digital innovation, and just educate yourself on those. But in that chapter 10, Count Your Money, what I said was, be aware of what you own, be aware of what you earn, and look very closely at the difference between what you need to live in an okay situation and what you can always put away. If you applied for a job where somebody gives you, in the UK, an average job would be 25, maybe £28,000, that's not a lot of money, but you can still save at least 10% of that every single month. That's £2,800 over, slightly less. It's £26,000 over the course, sorry, it's £2,600 over the course of a year. 2,800 is the 10% figure. But being able to put that money aside into something else would make a lot of sense. I still, or our family still, have individual stocks and shares, but we don't have any that pay less than 8% a year. And we have far less allocated to companies where shareholders can say, oh no, we've changed our decision, we're not going to pay dividends for the next 2 years because we want to strengthen our capital base, or we would love to do certain things, but we've decided that because resources are more expensive in a part of the world where we extract them or where we source them from, we're not going to pay dividends. And all of a sudden, the individual retail shareholders like you and I, we are stuck. So be very thoughtful about how you allocate some of your money. We've gone from a small proportion of our family portfolio, bear in mind it's my wife and I and 5 sons, so we are planning, my wife and I, every month, what can we do to ensure that our children are better protected in the future by living on as little as possible. We are frugal rather than tight, because we always have an eye on where would we be in 5 years' time when neither of us are working, and what kind of revenue can we have that allows us to live from either regular trading activity or from that position where we can say to ourselves, okay, we've made a gain, we could sell something. I don't think we'll ever sell any of our Bitcoin holdings, but we could borrow against them in low cost, easy, affordable, low levels of interest bank loans, where the bank says, okay, you've got that as security, we'll willingly give you money for this or that project. That's just a current perspective. If I take it to my most personal situation, I receive payments from Google for YouTube videos. I receive payments from Amazon on book sales and on the reading that people do on their Kindles. And every few thousand pages, we get income that is generated to us. All of that money goes straight into Bitcoin. It doesn't buy a Bitcoin, but every month it buys thousands of Satoshis that have a future value for us as a family. I just wanted to share this because I was concerned that 3 people who we have as friends who have good, successful businesses hadn't known where to start with exploring digital currency, and in particular looking at Bitcoin as a little part of their building their financial safety net, building their future security. And that's why I just thought I want to talk about this today, because all the people that are in here, and if you look, it says heartfelt direction and practical actions for artists, creators and makers. And I think that you and I, as the artistic people, sometimes we can be the least streetwise, we can be the most ignorant, we can be the least informed, we can be the people who think of the greater good but forget about protecting our families and our situation. And I think there is a significant place for Bitcoin in your portfolio. Let's say you get $100 from your YouTube videos this month. Well, put all of that into Satoshis. $100 would buy you, on today's rate, 89,105. And that's going to cost you £100. What about in 10 or 15 or 20 years? These are not predictions, these are just summations. But what if each of those is worth $1 in 10 years' time? Your £100 has become your $100 has become $89,000. That's a much faster growth rate than any economy in the world, and it's the best performing asset that has ever existed in the world. It beats silver, it beats gold. If you take big companies from the S&P 500, whether it's Amazon or Microsoft or Tesla or any of those sorts of traditional, large, successful corporations, Bitcoin thrashes them into distant positions. I wanted to talk about protecting your financial situation and giving yourself more options for your future. And I really genuinely think that it's time to educate yourself about digital currency, so that when you are looking at things like Chapter 10 and counting your money, you're not just looking at what comes in and how you utilize most of it or a significant portion of it before you put the rest into an investment fund or an investment activity for your future. There is no longer any excuse for not holding Bitcoin in your wealth protection fund or your future security fund. That's just my opinion.